I'm going to tell this exactly the way it happened.
No exageración.
No missing pieces. I was 31 years old at the time, working a regular office job in the United States, and I had taken a short break to clear my head. Nothing unusual. Nothing risky. Just a few quiet days away from people. The cabin I stayed in was normal. Small. Old, but well kept. It sat in a forest area that people used for hiking and seasonal camping. Families came through during the day. Hunters passed by in the fall. It wasn't some forbidden place. It wasn't abandoned land. I had stayed in cabins like this before and never felt unsafe. That day started like any other. I arrived in the afternoon, unpacked my bag, checked the locks, and turned on the heater. I remember making coffee and answering a few work emails. Outside, the trees were still, and the air felt calm. The kind of quiet that feels peaceful, not threatening. As the sun started to go down, I noticed how fast the light disappeared. Forest nights come early. I turned on the porch light and didn't think much of it. I cooked a simple dinner and ate alone at the small table by the window. Everything felt normal. What bothered me later was how ordinary it all felt right before something wasn't. Around dusk, I noticed muddy footprints near the steps of the cabin. At first, I assumed they were old, maybe from a hiker earlier that day. I didn't study them closely. I wiped my shoes on the mat and went inside. That was my first mistake. Later, when the forest went fully dark, I became aware of how quiet it was. No wind.
No insects.
No distant road noise. Just silence. The kind that makes you aware of every small sound inside the cabin. I remember thinking I should lock the door again, even though I already had. I checked the handle. It was locked. Still, I didn't feel fully settled. Then I heard something outside. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was slow and soft, like movement through leaves. I stood still and listened. It stopped almost immediately, like whoever or whatever made the noise knew I was listening. I told myself it was an animal, but I couldn't shake one thought. Animals don't stop when you notice them. The cabin was located in a wooded area outside a small town in Washington state. It sat at the end of a dirt road that branched off from a two-lane highway. There were no other cabins close by. The nearest one was at least half a mile away, and during the off-season, most of them were empty. It was late October, right after the weather started to turn cold. The trees were tall and thick, mostly pine, and they blocked out a lot of light once the sun went down. During the day, the place felt quiet but normal. At night, the darkness settled in fast and stayed heavy. I was there because I needed a break from my routine. Work had been stressful, and I hadn't taken time off in months. The cabin belonged to a friend of my father's, someone I trusted. He used it for hunting trips and told me I could stay there for a few nights as long as I kept the place clean and locked up when I left. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I planned to stay until Sunday. I brought enough food, my laptop, and some books. There was no Wi-Fi, but I knew that ahead of time. Cell service was weak, but usable if I stood near the front window. I told my sister where I would be and when I planned to come back. The cabin itself was simple. One bedroom, a small bathroom, a living area with a couch and a fireplace. The furniture was old but solid. Everything felt used, not abandoned. There were photos on the wall from past hunting seasons. A calendar from the previous year still hung near the door. I spent the first few hours settling in. I stacked firewood near the fireplace. I checked the windows and doors. All of them locked properly. I didn't notice anything out of place. No broken
glass.
No forced entry. No signs that anyone else had been inside recently. As evening came, the temperature dropped. I started a small fire and cooked dinner. The woods outside grew darker and quieter. The light from the cabin windows felt like it was being swallowed by the trees.
There was nothing scary about it yet.
Just isolation. And the understanding that I was completely alone out there. The first strange thing happened later that night, and at the time, it didn't feel important enough to react to. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop closed, just listening to the fire crackle. The cabin had settled the way old buildings do, with quiet pops and shifts in the wood.
I was used to that.
What stood out was a sound that didn't match the rest. Something brushed against the side of the cabin. It wasn't a hard impact, more like a slow drag. I froze and listened. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. I waited longer, expecting to hear it again, but the forest stayed silent. I told myself it was a branch. The trees were close, and even a small breeze could cause that. Still, I stood up and checked the windows. The glass was dark. Nothing moved outside. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps. They were faint and uneven, like someone walking carefully on dirt and leaves. They didn't come closer right away. They moved back and forth, stopping, then starting again. I stood near the door, holding my breath, trying to decide if I was imagining it. Then the footsteps stopped directly outside the cabin. I waited. Nothing happened. After a while, I convinced myself it had been an animal. Deer passed through the area all the time. I sat back down, but I didn't turn on the TV or music. The quiet felt different now. Heavier. Not long after that, the porch light went out. I hadn't touched the switch. The bulb was working earlier. I walked to the front window and looked out. The area in front of the cabin was completely dark. The trees blended together into one solid. That's when I noticed something near the edge of the light coming from inside. A shape moved between two trees. It was too tall to be a deer. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see more, but whatever it was had already moved out of sight. My reflection stared back at me instead.
Pale. Tense.
My chest felt tight. I became very aware of my own breathing. I checked my phone. No new messages. One bar of signal, barely holding on. I thought about calling someone, just to hear another voice, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I locked the door again, even though it already was. I closed the curtains. I sat in silence and listened. That's when I realized the sounds outside were matching my movements inside the cabin. After I realized the sounds outside were matching my movements, I stopped walking altogether. I stood in the middle of the cabin and waited. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like whoever was outside was waiting too. A few minutes passed. Then I heard a slow step on the porch. The wood creaked under weight. Not the random sound of an animal jumping. A controlled step. I felt my stomach tighten. The porch boards were old, but they didn't make that sound unless someone stood on them. I moved toward the bedroom and closed the door halfway, leaving a small gap, so I could still hear. My heart was beating harder now, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to panic over nothing. The door handle rattled. Just once. Slow and careful. Whoever touched it didn't pull or push. They tested it. When it didn't open, they let go. I backed into the bedroom and shut the door quietly. The cabin felt smaller now. The walls felt thinner. I could hear my own breathing in my ears. Then I heard footsteps again, this time moving around the cabin. They stopped near the bedroom window. The curtain shifted slightly, as if something brushed against it from the outside. I stayed completely still. A shadow passed across the window. It lingered there longer than it should have. I could tell someone was standing just inches away from the glass. I imagined them listening the same way I was, trying to figure out where I was inside. My phone vibrated in my hand as it lost signal again. I checked the screen. No service. I felt trapped. The car was parked out front, but there was no way to reach it without going outside. The back of the cabin faced dense forest. No clear path.
No lights.
Then came a knock. 3 soft taps on the front door. Not aggressive. Not rushed.
Calm.
I held my breath. The knock came again, slightly louder. Whoever it was wasn't trying to break in yet. They were letting me know they were there. I realized then that this wasn't random. Someone had followed me out here. Someone knew I was alone. The final sound before everything escalated was a voice.
Low. Male. Close to the door.
Hello. That's when I understood I wasn't being watched anymore. I was being approached. The moment I heard his voice, my body reacted before my mind did. I moved backward, slow and quiet, until I was pressed against the far wall of the bedroom. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I hoped he would think the cabin was empty. The front door handle turned. This time, there was no hesitation. He twisted it harder, then pulled. When it didn't open, he knocked again, louder than before. "I know you're in there," he said. His voice was steady. Not angry. Not rushed. That scared me more than yelling would have. I looked around the room, trying to find somewhere to hide. The bed was too low. The closet was small but better than nothing. I slipped inside and pulled the door almost closed, leaving just enough space to see. The sound of glass breaking echoed through the cabin. He had smashed one of the front windows. I heard him climb through, his boots hitting the floor inside. He didn't rush. He walked. Slow footsteps. Deliberate. Like he wasn't worried about me escaping. I covered my mouth to keep myself quiet. My chest burned as I tried not to breathe too loudly. The bedroom door opened. The light from the hallway spilled across the floor. His shadow stretched into the room first. I watched his boots step inside. He stopped and listened. For a moment, everything went still. Then his head turned toward the closet. I didn't wait anymore. I pushed the closet door open and ran past him. He shouted and reached for me, but he missed. I slammed into the hallway wall and kept moving. I grabbed my keys off the table and ran for the back door. He was right behind me. I could hear his breathing now, fast and close. I burst through the back door and ran into the trees. Branches cut my arms. The ground dropped and shifted under my feet. I didn't look back. I reached the road and ran until my legs gave out. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. I stepped into the road, waving my arms. The car stopped. I collapsed next to it, shaking. The man never came out of the trees. The driver who stopped was a middle-aged man in a pickup truck. He didn't ask many questions. He could see I was in shock. He told me to get in and drove straight to the nearest ranger station, which was about 15 minutes away. The police arrived shortly after. I gave my statement in pieces, trying to keep my voice steady. I told them about the man, the window, the footsteps, everything. They took it seriously right away and drove me back to the cabin. By the time we returned, it was past midnight. The front window was shattered exactly where I said it was. Glass covered the floor. Muddy boot prints led from the porch into the cabin and through every room. The bedroom door was wide open. Then one of the officers found something that made the situation much worse. Behind the cabin, hidden under a pile of brush, was a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. In that clearing was a tarp stretched low between two trees. Under it were supplies. Canned food. Empty water bottles. A flashlight. Extra batteries. It wasn't a temporary setup. The officer told me someone had been living there. They searched farther and found more signs. A path worn into the ground that led from the clearing directly to the back of the cabin. Cigarette butts crushed into the dirt. Footprints layered over each other, going back weeks. The man hadn't just followed me. He had already been there. Inside the cabin, another detail changed everything. One of the officers opened a cabinet above the fridge. Inside was a notebook that didn't belong to me or the cabin owner. It was filled with dates. Each page listed times. Short notes. Things like lights on, car arrived, alone, and night. The last entry was written that same day. It ended with one line. Tonight. The officers exchanged looks, but didn't say much after that. They searched the surrounding woods until sunrise and never found him. When they asked me why I thought he broke in instead of waiting longer, I didn't have an answer. But I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. He wasn't improvising. He had been watching. And that night, something in his plan had changed. I didn't stay in the cabin again. I didn't even go back to collect my things. The police brought out what they could the next day, and that was the end of it for me. The owner boarded the place up and said he would deal with it later. A few weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I went back to work. I slept in my own bed again. I told myself the danger was over because I had escaped and the police had been involved. But the case didn't move forward. No suspect was ever identified. No arrests were made. The notebook was logged into evidence, but there were no fingerprints that led anywhere. The officers told me this wasn't unusual in rural cases. People move through forests all the time. Some never get found. What bothered me was something small the officer mentioned in passing before he left. He said the knot. It hadn't been out there long, which meant the man was still nearby. I tried to forget that. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't in the forest. I wasn't alone in a cabin. I was safe. Then, about a month later, I received a message on my phone from an unknown number. It was just a photo. A picture of a dirt road. The same road that led to the cabin. There was no text.
No explanation.
Just the image. I reported it immediately. The police traced the number, but it was prepaid. No name. No address. No location. I deleted the photo, but I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. I don't know how he got my number. I don't know if he ever left the forest. And every time I lock my door at night, I wonder if he's still writing dates somewhere. Just waiting for another one to say, tonight.